All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. You're kicking off your first Monday of daylight savings time with us, and we are excited to make use of the hour that you lost from yesterday and get us focused on many hours of work that are ahead of us to be able to change our city for the better. So you're in the right place if you are here for a teach-in on unarmed crisis response work that we've been building on LA Forward for the last year or so. We're going to catch you all up and then actually pull you into the process because there's things we need to learn about your districts, other people that we imagine you will want to bring into this process. And within the next week, we're hoping that the folks on this call begin helping us sort of narrowing down a lot of the things that our city could be spending its money on for unarmed crisis response. My name is Godfrey Plata. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the deputy director at LA Forward, and I get to support a lot of the folks that you're going to be able to learn from tonight and who have been in this work for the last year or so. If you're new to LA Forward is a community first and foremost. It's a community of folks all across LA County, including LA City, that believes that a better world is possible if we are in relationship with each other, that we understand all the different rules and levers of democracy we could probably be leveraging, and then that'll help us to get better policies that are more inclusive and progressive for all of Los Angeles. And so really excited to be doing this on the heels of an election, because not everything is about elections. There are many more levers than that, but elections are also very exciting. And for folks who don't know, there were new results that were dropped just 2.5 hours ago. You can get involved with us in many ways. A couple of things about the work you are entering on this call. So this work on unarmed crisis response is not necessarily an LA Forward's mission. What is an LA Forward's mission is bringing people together to be able to, again, build community and discuss challenges that are meaningful to them and their communities. And last year, we started bringing folks together, city council district by city council district across LA City, and over again in backyards and in parks, including from the folks who you're going to be meeting tonight. Folks desired a number to call that was different from the armed police to be able to respond to many different things around mental health, but also just around any sorts of needs that potentially could be reasonable to call for help for. You might just need help calling to quiet a neighbor who's having a raging party, and maybe that doesn't require an armed person showing up at their door, right? We're talking about how we support folks who might be unhoused and going through a crisis on your street, but we're also talking about folks who are housed and just need somebody to call to be able to attend to particular things that are happening, and those folks don't need to be armed. And so starting last year, at the beginning of the year, those types of conversations began to convene across LA Forward. And what we discovered was that in April of 2023, the mayor's budget dropped. A draft of it dropped for city council, and $0 worth of increases were in that initial draft in terms of unarmed crisis response services. And for a conversation that lots of city council members have been having, that even Mayor Karen Bass has talked about in the past, it's surprising that $0 of investments were being made for unarmed crisis response. So we galvanized as folks who had already been gathering across LA City, and were able to get $16 million included into that final budget when that finished in June. And so since then, this group has gotten really obsessed with learning much more about unarmed crisis response, the city's plans for it, the county's plans for it, where the money goes, what we could be spending it on. And so today, what you're entering is a conversation about these particular parts of unarmed crisis response services. What we've learned over time is there are so many unarmed crisis responses in the world. Affordable housing is a response to crisis that is also unarmed. But for the purposes of this conversation, we are going to be winnowing down to this particular set of definitions around what we mean by unarmed crisis response and how we can be investing in it. So we're talking about who residents can call in a in crisis or when they witness crisis, what unarmed people or services are deployed as a result of that call, and then the quality of that service or those people who respond to that call. So it's all of these different things are in the world of unarmed crisis response services that we're going to be talking about today. And we want to be really specific that today we're looking at the LA City budget opportunities. We know that LA County also provides lots of unarmed crisis response services, and they are also growing those services, in particular around mental health. Today, we're focusing on the city level because, again, last year during budget season, we saw that the mayor had not prioritized money to be put into that budget. And so we want to pay attention this year because it's time. It's April next month, and Mayor Bass must propose a draft budget to LA City Council by April 20th. And so we are trying to get ahead of the game, be clear about our demands, talk to all the city council members who already have been involved in the organizing we are doing, and just be very clear about our expectations for what happens when that budget drops. And if that budget drops and there are $0 in it, we are way ahead of the game than we were last year to be able to make sure that there are things that are responsive to the people of LA when that budget is revised. So here's what we're doing today. Today, we are comparing and contrasting 6 opportunities for investment. You're going to see them literally listed as choices 1 through 6 throughout this call. You're going to be set up to vote for which of those 6 you would prioritize for where you live and the communities that you live or work in. You're going to literally rank your choices from 1 through 6 so that we have a sense of folks who are interested in this particular issue area, where you gravitate toward as well. And then you're going to have an opportunity to spread the word to get more survey responses out there because we're literally just doing this launch today, and we're going to be collecting survey responses until Friday. And so you are here to be able to learn about each of these 6 choices. You're going to be able to vote for those choices, and then we want you to spread the word and be ambassadors of that, so we're getting a pulse of as many people as possible, because certainly 23 people does not make the city of LA on the call, but that's who's here today. Everyone else is at Madonna. So what we're going to do is we're going to just make sure we have some basics about the budget and the 6 choices, and then we're going to go through them one by one. We're also going to drop some links in the chat box throughout so that you can follow along on a document that we've created for you to reference. We'll put the survey link in the chat box. So this is going to be very interactive. If you are driving, please don't click any buttons. Just, just be with us and you'll get a chance to like click on things later on. But if you are in a place where you're able to interact, you're going to see lots of links come through the chat box. So let's get started with a couple of just basic things to know. For folks who are newer to the LA City budget, there's been a really great movement around it called People's Budget LA. And so you can actually go to peoplesbudgetla.com/howbudgetworks to see their summary of how the city budget works. And this is from 2021. So there are going to be some things on there that are like not enumerated to this year. You're going to see some names that no longer make sense. But in general, what's to know is that starting in July is when we start a fiscal year as the city of LA, which means that the city finalizes its budget toward the end of that cycle. So you'll see here that in April, the city council begins a review of the mayor's budget, and then that conversation continues through May and June until we start the fiscal year in July with that new budget in mind. This means that conversations have already been happening around this. And luckily for you, LA Forward and its unarmed crisis response work has met with 40 plus different characters in this entire conversation at the city level, the county level, service providers, et cetera, to try to triangulate as much information as possible. And so there are city council offices waiting to hear from us. Literally, the deputy mayor's scheduler emailed like 2 hours ago trying to schedule a meeting with LA Forward. Because it's awaiting the responses that you all will be giving. And so just that situates today's conversation in a larger process. Here's an overview of the 6 choices you'll have. And then again, we're going to zoom into each one. So this is just like, it's like your table of contents for what we're about to do. And if somebody on the facilitator team could put the guide in the chat box, that would be helpful as well. The guide is like a 5-page version of this PowerPoint. So if you want to see things in charts, you want to click on maps, you want to be like super rigorous in your understanding of this, go to the guide and you can look at that if you'd like. But we are going to try to summarize for you very concisely what each of these choices are. Choice 1 of 6 will be about investing in evaluation. A lot of the things you're going to hear about today are relatively new, like literally as of end of 2020. And the city has still been piloting them in different parts of the city. So the city is still learning about them. And so investing in evaluation would mean we should probably know more about what we're doing before we decide what else we're doing next. That's, if you vote for evaluation, that's the orientation that you are going to be voting for. Again, we're going to zoom into that in a moment. Choices 2 and 3 have to do around something called UMCR, Unarmed Models of Crisis Response. Unarmed Models of Crisis Response. This is a new pilot from a new office that started last year. And so a little bit later in this call, Jason is going to be walking you through what UMCR does, where it is, and your two choices for investment are, do we want to spread it to more places, or do we want to deepen the scope of what it can do in its existing places? So geography and scope are going to be choices 2 or 3 for the UMCR pilot, which you're going to learn about on this call. Choices 4 and 5 have to do around expanding the services for something called Circle. Circle is something that the city has been piloting since the end of 2020, and it specifically produced unarmed responses in particular for folks who, or for incidents involving folks who are unhoused. And so you'll learn more about Circle from Brian on the call today. And when he goes through what Circle is, where Circle is, and what it does, you'll have the opportunity to share whether you want to prioritize expanding where Circle is or deepening the scope of what Circle can do. Okay, so those are choices 4 and 5. So far, evaluation, 2 different ways to expand the UMCR pilot, 2 different ways to expand Circle. And your last choice that you'll be able to prioritize or vote for is about centralizing dispatch. There's all sorts of services that can be dispatched. UMCR, Circle, all the things that 9/11 could do, all the things the county could do in terms of mental health supports. But you have to remember all of these numbers. So choice 6 suggests maybe we should figure out how to centralize the dispatch for these numbers so that residents can actually make use of these services through one number. So Mia will be talking later about what centralized dispatch looks like. So again, in a moment, you're going to hear about each of these different choices one by one. And Leon, like those are some of the choices that you'll get as a voter of this particular conversation. And there'll be a comments box in the survey as well, so you can write in different thoughts that you might have as well. What we're going to do now is if you go to the guide that Jason put into the chat box, you'll see each of these choices one by one. You'll also see linked on there the survey. But what we're going to do together here is we're going to go through each of these choices one by one. And when you're ready to, you can then use your survey to vote and to prioritize what you want. And the survey link will be that on the screen. It'll be tinyurl.com/showmethemoney-survey. And someone could share that in the chat box. That would be great. But again, we've got a guide and a survey. So take a look at either of those. And they link to each other as well. I'm going to get us started with just, again, rehashing what the evaluation component of this means. And so if you voted for choice, or if you vote to prioritize choice 1, this would mean that in our advocacy, we would direct the city to invest in some sort of evaluation of these various different unarmed crisis response services. Right now, the only evaluations have been done through small reports from the CAO, the City Administrative Office. The Controller's Office is currently doing forms of evaluation, but none of these things are aligned on what metrics we should be prioritizing as a city. And so if we were to invest in evaluating any of these unarmed crisis response services, it would force a conversation where the city would need to align on what it thought success meant in terms of any of these services. Like is it a call volume thing where we're trying to reduce calls to 911 that then lead to armed police? Is it about different types of folks who are served? Is it about increasing volume to things like 988, which is a crisis hotline that is available? Any of these metrics are the things the city could choose to begin to evaluate what it does, but currently has not aligned on that conversation. So these reports are just happening sort of ad hoc. And if you choose choice one, you'd be asking the city to be clearer on what it wants from different unarmed crisis response services, and therefore would use that information to then invest in future services. One note we've learned from the city, again, we've met with lots of different council offices. It seems like evaluation would likely, like that the city would very likely opt to use some sort of outside evaluator or consultant to help expedite its process. So just know that if you were to choose this, that's what would happen. Like the city would find some sort of RFP process to find some sort of outside consultant to then perform an evaluation that would come back to the city. There's been no motion made around that, so like that could change, but that's the intel that we've received from folks, including a council member's office on the public safety committees, and that's where some of those choices would get made. So that's choice one. I'm going to pass things to Jason to start talking about choices 2 and 3, which have to do around UMCR or unarmed model of crisis response pilots. Jason?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Enright. Just real quick to let you know about me, I am a stay-at-home dad and a community organizer. And a year ago, I didn't know about any of this stuff. I got involved at a meeting just like this to start learning about all of these programs. And now I'm probably, after talking to our council members and congressmen and all these people, one of the most informed people on this. So if you want to get involved with this stuff, LA Forward is great at helping you do that and make a difference in your community. So now to talk a little bit about this UMCR pilot program. Godfrey, can you move to the next slide? So, what is UMCR? It is poorly named. I'll tell you that first, because we have a whole unarmed model. We have a whole unarmed crisis response program, and one of those programs is also called Unarmed Model of Crisis Response. But despite the name, it was launched just in January of this year, after a big report about unarmed crisis response was released by the city administrative office last year. In that report, they identified that there were several call types that the Los Angeles Police Protective League, which is the police union, had identified they didn't feel they were the best to handle anymore. These were mostly calls having to do with like mental health, substance abuse, behavioral distress, conflict resolution, those sorts of things. The CAO identified these call types and modeled a new program that was launched in January of this year, where you can call 911 or you can call the non-emergency line 877 Ask LAPD, and you can describe what's going on, and you can say, I would like an unarmed crisis response or a non-emergency response. And if it falls under one of these call types, they will send out a specialized team that has a behavioral health specialist and a community worker or a therapist and a crisis interventionist. Now, like all of the other pilot programs we're going to be talking about tonight, this isn't all over the city yet. It's just in a few specific pilot areas, which we'll get to the geography of that in a second. But this program is currently operating in 3 areas. It's operational 24/7. These services are provided by contracted providers, Penny Lane, Exodus Recovery, and the Alcott Center. These are primarily groups that do social work, mental health work, work with like I believe like Penny Lane works with a lot of teens who are dealing with um, like substance abuse issues, things like that. Um, this pilot program is set up to be evaluated already at the end of the year through a partnership with Claremont Graduate University. And they did say they would, most likely, if they continued the program at the end of the year, they would continue the evaluation as well. This pilot program is designed specifically to not overlap with Circle, which we'll be talking about in a moment. It has different call service types and different call areas. And like I mentioned a few times, this just launched this year, so there's no data yet. Um, and then if we can move on to the next slide. You can see right here the areas in yellow on this map are the current areas this UMCR pilot serves. So it's Devonshire, Southeast LA, and Wilshire. And this is just for the first year of the pilot. One of the things, basically, you're going to have two choices tonight that deal with this out of the main six. One, it would be to expand to new areas. So you can see the outlines on this map is how they would break them up, most likely. So you can see like where they could expand these areas to. Or you could, or the other thing we could vote for tonight, if you want to prioritize this program, would be to add new call types. Of the initial call types that LAPPL identified, they only chose about half of them, so there are more call types, but that would probably involve having to expand the program beyond just primarily being a mental health related program. So yeah, and I believe we're going to have questions later on in the evening. But just again, if we go to the next, go, I guess, back to the choices slide, you can see the choices for UMCR are basically, do we expand its scope or do we expand its geography? And I will pass it to Brian next.
Hello. Hi, I'm Brian Cohan. I have been organizing around homelessness in Los Angeles now for about 5 years, and I run the Sela Neighborhood Homeless Coalition's program in Hollywood. And in that role, we have activated Circle some. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what that is. And again, just like with UMCR, we're going to be talking about, you're going to be asked to rank different options, either expanding the geography of where these pilots are or scope. And scope, I would just say anything that would fall into the bucket of giving it more money without expanding the geography, maybe up to and including maybe like a more expensive contractor, those kinds of things. But let's go ahead and look. We go to the next slide. Thanks. All right, so the same mode of contact as UMCR. You call the LAPD non-emergency line or 911, and the operators are trained to redirect qualifying calls. Now, I will say from experience, if you have called the LAPD non-emergency line before, sometimes nobody answers. So if that happens, just call 911 and be very specific that you would like unarmed response. And when you ask, they're gonna evaluate the call on a few criteria. Now, the biggest difference between Circle and UMCR is Circle is very explicitly geared towards calls that relate to homelessness. It is one of the filtering criteria for the call. And the call has to be within one of the Circle program areas, and then it cannot involve violence, criminal activity, or an urgent medical problem. Who shows up? So on paper, a licensed mental health counselor and two outreach workers with lived experience. Now, the lived experience part comes from the main contractor for Circle, which is Urban Alchemy, and they tend to hire folks who are formerly incarcerated or who are coming out of homelessness, or who have a history of substance abuse. So, the theory being there are wells of empathy there because it's somewhat of a similar population that they're serving. What resources are available? So they'll show up with a van. and that van can transport folks to decompression centers. Now, everywhere Circle is operating, they're supposed to have a room essentially where they can take folks to decompress if there's a substance issue, come down off of that. It's just like supposed to be a calm place where you can take folks and maybe have more calm interactions with the counselor. The other component to Circle that might make it a little bit different than UMCR is it's not just crisis response. In some of the Circle areas, especially Hollywood, they also have outreach teams that are working the area 8 hours a day on weekdays. The crisis response component is 24/7, but they have outreach workers working on weekdays, and so the point here is to try to build relationships with the community that they might be receiving calls from. So especially in Hollywood, you know, if they show up to a call, there's a high likelihood that they actually know the person that they're being called to help. They do have some connections to other parts of the homeless service sector. Now, this is never as good as you would like. You know, one of the things this group is discovering is that the county and city programs don't talk to each other all that well. They'll bring basic necessities, water, snacks, clothing, Narcan they'll have for reversing opioid overdoses. And all the outreach workers are trained in trauma-informed care, de-escalation, as well as CPR and basic medical needs. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, so this is where Circle is. The map on the left here, right now it's in 1/5 of LA City. It started in Venice and Hollywood in 2021. Since then, it's been slowly expanding. The most recent expanse, which is I think cut off at the bottom, is the Harbor District, and that started this February, so a month ago. But we're up in the valley a little bit, South LA, and then down into from Hollywood to Skid Row, that quarter. And I've included a map to the right, which is a map of unsheltered density in LA. So this is just per census tract, how many people are experiencing homelessness per square mile. And you can see the main goal of where they have put Circle is to they're going where the call volume is. You can kind of see the map to the right that they're sort of doing that. It sort of maps pretty well onto the density map, like the corridor from Hollywood to Skid Row being the highest density, but then they also pick up parts of the valley where there is density. So 1/5 of LA City, that's 111 square miles. One of the options will be to expand this. I did see there was a CAO office report that would say covering the entire city the estimate was $24 million, which seems a little low to me, but it's not that much more than what we're paying right now. And it might just be because we're already kind of covering the highest call volume areas. I don't have a relationship to Urban Alchemy other than I have called them before via Circle. Kathleen asked me that.
Brian, can I just add something
about
Urban Alchemy?
Yeah.
I know that there are some concerns about Urban Alchemy. They're the service provider that provides Circle services for the city. Their contract is up for review this year, and sort of no matter what we decide tonight with how we vote, one thing we have been pushing for in all of our meetings is for that contract to be heavily reviewed and evaluated before being continued. So we are aware of Urban Alchemy and some of its issues.
Yeah, Circle is not Urban Alchemy. They are just the current contractor. All right, who's next?
Would be me. Hi, everyone. Mia Levis Porter. I am a mom of 2 boys, and I got involved with this project because as a Moms Demand Action volunteer, if you know, that's for gun safety. I learned that I was a survivor of gun violence. My brother had died by gun suicide. He was schizophrenic. And there was an incident, and that was 30 years ago. But there was an incident in Northern California. Angelo Quinto, who his mom called police for support when he was having a schizophrenic episode. And by the time police arrived, she had calmed him down, but they went ahead and used force. And one of the officers put his knee on Angelo's neck and he died. And that was re-traumatizing for me. And so I knew that there had to be a better way, especially in LA. We have to figure this unarmed crisis response out. So the option choice 6 that I'm going to talk about today is about centralizing dispatch. What matters is that the number that people have a singular number to call so that any unarmed crisis response service is within easy reach of residents. So currently, dispatch of emergency calls are through LAPD. And there are several issues with this current model of dispatch. So first, there are currently countless numbers, emergency numbers being shared. Jason shared 877 Ask LAPD, 988, 911, 211, and the number of the Department of Mental Health, the county department. Godfrey, can you advance to the next slide? So thankfully, LA County created this graphic to help clarify for residents when they should use the emergency number, which emergency number, and it does not include the LAPD number. As Godfrey said earlier, problem is no one's going to remember all these numbers off the top of their head. Initially, 988, which was launched in June or July of 2022, was supposed to be that alternate option for 911 nationwide, but the rollout has been difficult. There's been a ping pong between the emergency numbers, which ends up resulting in a delay. In fact, this conversation started when one of our LA Forward members mentioned calling the LAPD line, was bounced to 911, 988 and back. And so this does result in longer wait times, sometimes 45 minutes to an hour. And for me, if someone was suicidal, I know that that would be a life lost because our crisis response failed them. The second issue is that there's an issue of communication in real time. So when law enforcement is sent out to someone experiencing a mental health crisis, there's no way for police to get the right person, a trained mental health professional to support the person struggling. We've heard countless stories of calls to 911, including Angelo Quinto's, that have resulted in fatalities because when police were the first responders, they weren't necessarily properly trained in de-escalating the situation. And then third, dispatch through LAPD will be more likely that LAPD will dispatch more LAPD rather than one of our current unarmed crisis response services. Now, CD1 Council Member Eunices Hernandez and the CAO report, if someone could drop the link in for the CAO report, were we sharing that? As best practices to centralize dispatch. So this would enable all calls to be received at one centralized dispatch center, and it would allow for judgment of what type of service is most useful for any crisis by someone who is trained, a trained operator, before dispatching to any other service, including Circle, UMCR, etc. They also recommend that LA must develop a centralized radio system, which would allow LAPD, LAFD to communicate with unarmed crisis response services directly, and it would allow them to enable use of those services more frequently. LA should relocate 911. This is one of their other best practices, that LA should relocate 911. That's also known as a PSAP, which is a public safety answering point, to outside the police department. Many other cities with unarmed crisis response programs house their PSAP outside of their police department. Cities have found that separating call response from law enforcement services can support the streamlining and acceptance of new intervention protocols. And I'll talk about a model that is effective in a little bit. The additional benefits of this is that centralizing unarmed crisis response services would enable broader trust in the 911 system. You have a lot of people who are afraid to call 911 because of the outcomes that we've seen in the past where their loved ones are injured or killed by law enforcement. Second, residents would not have to be the ones to remember. They wouldn't have to remember so many numbers, and they would not be the ones put in a place where they have to diagnose what emergency services they need. So this would help LA begin ensuring that unarmed crisis response services are accessed and deployed. And it could also be an incentive to inspire more collaborative work between the county and the city services that, as Brian had said earlier, they don't always speak to each other or know about each other's existence. So as I mentioned, centralized dispatch is possible. There is a model in Denver called STAR, and dispatch is one number, which makes it way more efficient, and it works. In the first 2 years of the program, lower level crimes fell by 34%, which resulted in about 1,400 fewer criminal offenses where STAR was implemented. However, one thing to keep in mind is that Denver is able to centralize the calls because they are small enough to combine city and county resources, which is not the case in Los Angeles. Other things to consider regarding centralizing dispatch, it will be a longer term to implement. There's a lot of resistance because it's reinventing the wheel, basically. LAPD is against centralization. Perhaps it could be concerned about getting their funding taken away. And operators will be unionized differently. AFSCME, sorry, I can't say that. AFSCME are the ones who are in the operators on that union, and they would have to approve the additional scope of their role. And, you know, unlike Jason and Brian's presentations, this option is a little less sexy because it's basically creating a new system. And so there is a little more resistance to, as I said, reinventing the wheel rather than testing out a new model or what have you. So that is your sixth option, centralizing dispatch services. And let me hand over to, thank you, Brian. It is sexy. Let me hand it over back to Godfrey.
Thanks, Mia. Am I on? Okay, great. Yeah. Wonderful. So a couple of things. I'm just gonna put the 6 again in on your screen, just so you know what the 6 are. It's these. So again, a couple of things. One is, we haven't moved yet on any of these things. Like, we're operating on nothing about us without us for this entire endeavor, right? Like, the city council and the mayor will make their own choices, including the choice to potentially fund none of these things if we don't let our voices be heard. So if there are things that you like better than others, if there are things you don't like amongst these, like, that is the purpose of this particular survey and you getting the word out about it. We want to make sure that when you take this survey, you'll notice the first question even is about what city council district you're in, because we want to be able to report back to different city council offices, hey, like, of the folks who took this survey from your city council district, like, people didn't want this one, they wanted this one, right? Like, so that we are actually able to advocate for the things that you all are wanting now that we're learning about this together. So again, you're gonna, when you click on the survey where it says survey, you'll see that you'll be able to rank each of these particular choices 1 through 6. It'll force rank it. So you'll force something to be ranked last as well. A couple of things. In a moment, we are going to open up. I see there's a hand up already. This is exactly it. We're going to open up to questions, reactions, and lobbying. There's people here with experiences with these various services. This is your time to share what you know, what you have experienced, what questions or reactions you have to help others also inform their priorities as well. We're going to do that for about 10 minutes. We are going to pause at 5 minutes before the hour to do some next steps, but this is intended to help people fill out their surveys on this very call right now. And then again, you want to share these out on your Discords, your Slacks, wherever it is that you're, email, text it out to people who would want to know more about this. So I thought I did see a hand from a phone number. I didn't know who that phone number was because there's no name attached to it. If that person is in a safe place to be called on, then I'm happy to call on that number. If you could, let's do the phone number one first, and then Marco Santana. Phone number, can you share who you are before you talk? And then you go ahead. It's yeah, there you go.
Hello?
There you are. Caller.
Hi,
Sounds
I'm
like a radio
Ruth.
show. Hi.
Hi, I'm an unhoused person in LA. I live outside. I've interacted with Circle before. They're in my neighborhood, like as of the end of last year, I think. They came to my where I live. I've lived here for like more than 5 years. They came here like late last year, and they talked to me about like if I wanted, they could take me to Sylmar like one way in their van and leave me at like a congregate shelter it's gender segregated. I think it was only for women. I asked them if they have any Narcan, and they said no, but they had like water bottles. And they never came back after that. Nothing like triggered them to come here. Like they were just walking around, I guess. But like I just kind of felt like it would have been helpful if they could have actually gotten me into like Inside Safe or any of the other programs that are currently operating, instead of like one way to Sylmar without any of my stuff. I didn't feel like that was that helpful because like this is my neighborhood, and but I do want housing, and I think that they actually relayed to somebody else that like I didn't want housing, which was completely not the idea that I was trying to convey to them. But I don't, maybe it wasn't them, I don't know. But there's this thing that people should know about 988. I know it's not exactly what we're talking about, but it's related. The National Suicide Prevention Line had legislation passed where it's all going to be centralized. All the 988 calls are going to be centralized through them. And they have like shoddy data about how many calls they do connect to police, but it's somewhere between like 1% and 10%. And so people need to know that even if their phone is dead and the battery is off, they can somehow still track your location. And like a lot of people have ended up on 5150 holds this way. I think 86% of wellness checks by NYPD ended in somebody being forcibly hospitalized. So I did just want to let people know that that's a possibility if they're using these resources, and to be cautious of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. Like this is exactly the right time and space for folks to be sharing how they're experiencing various aspects of these systems, because that's again the point. Like nothing about us without us. Marco.
Thanks, Godfrey. Ruth, if I could take just like a small second, Ruth, if there's any questions on like accessing any sort of services for the service area that you're in, which is SPA 2, I'm happy to chat offline too. I used to work at LA Family Housing. I was a director there over access and a few other things. I just left some months ago to go to the county, but I still know a lot of folks, and I know that like non-congregate shelter is a little harder to access, but there's still definitely a possibility. So if you have questions, I can like put my info in the chat, and I'm happy to connect. But you're on your phone. Shoot, sorry. But
you can email me. I can give you my email address. I don't mind sharing it. It's ruthless ROOFLESS, Ruth, RUTH, @gmail.
Sorry, can you say it one more time? ROO?
ROOFLESS, Roofless, Ruth,
Oh.
RUTH.
Got it. And it's at Gmail?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I was gonna put it in the chat too. Thanks. And I'll send you an
Thank
email and we can try to hopefully chat and see if there's anything to connect to. And then the question I had, Mia, I thought the presentation was really great that you did. I like the centralized dispatch idea just because it is hard for folks, especially like, let's say there's folks that are new arrivals into the country, to try to memorize all these different things, right? And so I think there's a lot that could be said from centralizing dispatch. There was a comment that was dropped in the chat, and this is also my hesitation on it. And so I don't know, obviously, Denver's smaller and like we don't have anything to go off of really. But having worked in homeless services, I know that during extreme weather conditions, 211 gets severely impacted. So my only concern is I want to make it easier, but I also don't want to make it harder for folks. And has there been any thought, like obviously it's probably all premature, but has there been any thought as to how that could work, especially in situations like that where there's extreme weather conditions and unhoused folks are going to try to access shelter services?
So I know that, when we had talked with LA County regarding 988, we were told that 988 is more, sorry, I'm mixing things up. Circle is more for triage, more for like, if you see someone naked walking down the street, if you see, somebody needs like urgent help, physical, what have you. And that 988 would be a number to call for mental health, suicide prevention, what have you. So I think that if it's something with weather, I would think, I'm welcome any of the other presenters to speak. I would think that they would rely on Circle, but they are still processing and piloting the UMCR program. So I think we still have to see how that goes.
Yeah, and the reality is there might not be a reality just yet, but just that triaging aspect, I didn't know if there was any thought towards that just yet.
Yeah, so one of the things we learned in our research actions is that the big problem with dispatch right now is whether you call 211, you call 911, you call whoever, they're all using different computer systems and they're all using different triage methods for like the questions they ask to go through to determine what services you need to be sent. And part of the slowdown that causes those really long wait times and causes call volume to build up is that once LAPD like says, oh, okay, you need shelter services, we'll transfer you to this person, that person then has to go through all of the interview questions again because they can't just be sent a file with the open call data that's already been collected because they're all on different services. So one of the things when we're talking about centralizing dispatch is like bringing it all onto one system so that hopefully we can lower those call times, lower some of that confusion, and getting everybody sort of using the same interview questions, the same triage questions. Because it should in today's digital age be able, like when I'm transferring the call, I'm also sending you the file I've already opened on that call, to make it easier. That's part of what's causing, especially when there's high call volume days, causing so much backup.
Thank you all. I see that there are 4 hands up, so I want to get to all 4 folks. I want to recognize that we are 5 minutes before 8, but if folks want to stay, there's that. But like before you leave, make sure you do survey or get that link. If you need the resource guide, just in case, there's that too. And then we also have graphics for you to spread the word on all of this as well. Let's go Yuval, and then I saw Aries' hand up, but let's go Yuval first. Yuval's hand was up.
I'll be quick because of the line. Sorry. There's just one thing that I'm wondering about, and I really appreciate all of these presentations. This is really, really interesting. Considering that like each of these 2 different programs have multiple contracted orgs, I don't know, I'm thinking about like the fact that I guess what I'm curious about is when you're talking to elected officials about these different programs and the orgs that work on them, is there any openness to um, bringing just like in city staff instead of contracting it out? Or how are folks thinking about it in the long term when you're talking about it with electeds, or even in the short term, considering the deficit that people are talking about in the news? So curious to hear if there's any thoughts there.
I'll share, and then would love for any of the folks who've been like closer to the organizing work to also add if I miss anything. Uh, a couple of things. Each council office and district has tended to approach this very differently. So when they're talking about who specifically is attending to any of these things, there are different opinions on whether it should be the city or should be some sort of nonprofit or service. Sometimes they're still mapping what services are even available for what in their particular areas, like substance abuse might demand a different type of response from other mental health type issues, for example, or for support for folks who are unhoused but are facing neither of those things, or domestic violence. Like each of these things, like folks are thinking about differently. And so their answer to that question of what their opinion is and which services they want, like depend on the context of all of that. When we've talked with a lot of homelessness service providers, a lot had been surprised that the city was trying to build up its capacities. They had become reliant on the county, which had been building up its expertise and experience in a lot of these types of services. And so they were very I don't know, it was just like very new and shocking that like the city would now be like a resource for some of these things in different places, especially when the systems aren't talking with each other. And that said, the county still needs to also build out its capacities as well and is trying to hire internally. So those are like some of the things that come to mind with your question, Yuval. But I'm curious if any of the folks have been involved in the organizing of this want to jump in with any additions there, either Mia, Brian, or Jason. And then I do want to make sure we get to Aries and then RD.
I can, well, I think myself and a lot of people on this call generally would like our government to do more. But this really at the end of the day is a question of money. And a lot of these programs are very new. And they're still, we've got multiple competing pilots. They've got shoestring budgets. And that's the whole point of this call, right? Is to advocate for more money for these programs to keep them going. So we can learn what we need to learn to make them work better. But yeah, absolutely. If in the future, like I would love to advocate for making them more robust. So I think the appetite is there, the money isn't.
And
also, just to add real quick. Oh, sorry, just to add really quick. These are 6 options. We sort of narrowed it down to choose for this year. This is going to be a multi-year project. And if you look at the CAO report, there is like a 5-year plan in there with hopes to eventually sort of condense these programs together to review contracts, all of these sort of things. So this is what we're focusing on right now for this budget year, but there's definitely more to come. And this project of ours is going to continue.
And I wanted to add that, what Brian was saying about budget, we are asking because we want to know what ask from the city. But, my comment that I just put in the chat, the city's great at emergency support, the triage, and the county is incredible. They have an incredible foundation for mental health support. And that's why the problem with that is that we'd have to figure out, and it would be a longer path to solution, because we'd have to figure out who is taking over what. Whereas like the other options, we know that we would only be working at asking the city to expand or what have you. That's the only caveat I would add.
Thanks, Mia. I did see again, I saw Arias's hand go down, then up, and then down again. So I just want to double check that wasn't an accident before I go to RD.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add everyone that I had experience working with the CIT program in the city of Chicago. And I will definitely say that I highly value centralizing the dispatch. of course, because I think it really does add some structure. And one of the things that I think for moving forward as far as accountability, I'm hoping maybe there can be maybe data on reports to see which services maybe need the most support and which areas, and maybe that can help us determine those service areas that were mentioned earlier for the other programs.
Thanks. That sounds like evaluation. is what that sounds.
Those
Yes,
are my
again.
top two. Yes.
RD, you're on mute.
Thank you. Succinct, RD, let's go. There are a number of things that jump out, and that's that many people do not trust what's already in process in the ways of these things. So my question to LA Forward is, in this proposing, say I choose 6 and 1 and then 4 and 3 and 2 and 5. I have no idea that that's what I'm going to do. But when y'all make choices on this, are you going to come up with a pre-evaluation type thing for the council members and or Karen Bass or whomever you present this to? Because one of the things that everybody keeps saying that I hear, and by everybody, I mean the council members that I go to see or that I watch on Zoom or whatever. Well, we need to know more about it. And so uses this and so uses that. And we don't know what's good and what's not. As an organization, are we preparing to tell them some possibilities that they can look into that their teams may not have thought of yet? That's my question. I'll shush.
Yeah, thanks, RD. So a couple of things that touches on. One is in the chat box. We are going to share with you what you said next Monday at 7. So you should come back to Zoom and you can register for that Zoom. It's the link is in the chat box. Like we want to make sure that like you all are like clear on whatever comes out of these surveys that you all are filling out. And again, it's not just going to be the people on this call. We're going to like email this out to all of LA Forward. You should share it with all of your networks as well who might have an opinion on this so that we can actually take a look at what they said together, or what you all said together. That said, like what we will be doing is bringing those results to bear on the different council offices and the mayor's office, et cetera, for this particular round of advocacy. So whatever things you all say are what we're going to bring. There's no predetermined evaluation of any of these things. This is part of it. This is part of the evaluation process that the city has not done itself, right? Like asking the people like what they need, and so we're contributing to their knowledge of these things. That said, like certainly part of organizing, we've met this group, this working group has met literally with dozens of different offices, agencies, service providers, etc., in the last year or so. And so that is what's happening here. This call is about being a megaphone to so many of the things that we've learned. And as you all continue to support that learning, we will be able to be a megaphone to for the things that you are bringing anecdotally as well to this call. I'm noticing that there is a call to action that is related from Cynthia and ACT LA in the chat box that are about alternatives to police responses at Metro. Again, like the city and Metro are different bodies. So just want to make sure that that's clear. That's why you don't see Metro on the list of 6 things. But Cynthia, did you want to just share anything? It sounds like that one is it's related clearly and it's up ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Godfrey. And thanks you all for inviting me into this space. I'm really learning a lot about a lot of these alternatives available that I didn't know about. Yeah, and a quick plug, we LA Forward is a part of ACT LA, and on the Metro side, we've really been keeping a close eye as Metro is getting ready to have an in-house police department, which we are really against, and instead pushing for an active investment in alternatives to safety, which includes housing, increased mental health support, increased, better infrastructure, restrooms, all the things we know that really keep us safe instead of continuing to funnel so much money into police contracts. And so I do want to invite you all to a couple things happening this month. This Thursday from 6 to 7:30, we're going to be having an online teach-in to just learn more about collective care practices through abolitionist practices here in LA from folks working on that have been working on this campaign for a while. And then we are rallying in front of Metro's board hearing on March 28th. We're hoping to have a big turnout of community members to continue to demand for the investment of safety alternatives. And I linked in the action alert, which has the details for all of the events and also a little email blurb that y'all are able to send out to your representatives.
Thanks, Cynthia. And like a couple of things to underline about what Cynthia shared. LA Forward is not the only one clearly working on all of these issues across LA and LA County. We don't want to pretend that that's a reality. Like, that's why we're very clear on, like, we are interested in who to call, who comes, and the quality of that service. Like, that is our very specific interest here. But we know that, like, things need to happen at the county level, the metro, around policing itself. All of those things are related together, and we want to be hyper-focused on our particular contribution to the work. And then as Cynthia was talking, I also remembered something a little bit from RD's question around, like, will LA Forward take steps with these different conversations with the mayor's office, the city council? Like, you all, by being engaged, are LA Forward. Like, you all can come to those meetings if you are available at the times and all of that stuff. Like, we go in groups of people. Those meetings are never held on a one-on-one basis. Like, we want to make sure that people are at the table. That is, like, the purpose of this democracy work. It's like, this is our right to be able to engage with our council offices, with our mayor around any issue. And this happens to be the thing that we happen to be organizing right now. And so you know, like, I just want to make sure that, like, folks know that LA Forward is not separate from the process you're engaging in. Like, you are doing it. You are LA Forward right now. And so with that said, we know we're over time. And so just want to make sure we're respecting folks' time. We did record this conversation, so that way anything that you want to come back to, we're going to try to make available by video. But you've got your resource guide in the chat box, the survey in the chat box, where we are asking that you all fill out your survey by Friday. We're asking that you share these with other folks who are in this world of either experiencing any of these needs for unarmed crisis response, desiring it for your communities. Maybe you're in an organization or do mutual aid work that is relevant to this. Like, bring all of those folks into the survey and into the conversation, and then come back on Monday to see what you all said, because it's not just about what you all said, it's what we do with that as well. And we want you to be a part of that for the next 2 months as we go into budget advocacy mode. So thank you all again for joining. I want to shout out our facilitators who have they did, you know, like 5 minutes of stuff each on this call, but that's been a year's worth of work to even get it to be that concise. And so really want to shout out Mia, Jason, and Brian for taking that time. And there are many others on this call as well who have participated in that process. Thanks, y'all. And we'll have a good night. Thanks. Be safe.
Thank you.